Okay, welcome everyone. Tonight we're going to be learning the spiritual and mystical perspectives of marriage. The idea here is that marriage is a spiritual, mystical connection. Of course, it has thousands of practicalities. But what we're going to try to do tonight is look at the spiritual and mystical underpinnings of the marriage relationship between men and women. It's very significant that we're just ending right now Yud Tet B'Kislev, which in Chabad is called the New Year of Chassidut. So it's very appropriate that we'll be learning these more spiritual perspectives colored by Kabbalah and Chassidut on marriage. So we're going to go through a series of different ideas. They're all connected, but each one, in a sense, is like a gem of insight in and of itself. But they all flow in a certain way, one into the other. We'll have a class for approximately 50 minutes. And then we'll open it up to questions. You could send chats and we'll get to them at that point. People can make comments. If there are none, I'll just continue to 6:45 as I'm teaching another class online at 7. So that's when I have to stop. So welcome again, everyone. Where we're going to start is from a formula, which I call 1 creates 2. In order to become one. Before there was a creation, all there was the oneness of God, infinite oneness of the light of God. And then God creates the world. The Torah begins with a bet, which equals 2, to indicate that now there is something, as it were, other than God. In other words, God makes a place through the mystical concept called Tzimtzum. God contracted his infinite being in order to make a place for finite reality. And therefore, that's indicated by the big bet of Bereshit. Now that there's a world, there's a relationship between God and the world, God and humanity. So 1 becomes 2. But if we look at the world as nothing more than dualities, opposites, bipolar, then that is not the purpose of the world. The purpose is to recognize and integrate and act on the knowledge that there is oneness in the world. Science itself, since Einstein, has recognized that, at least in the physical universe, there is a unity between all of the forces, the cardinal forces of creation. How much more so when we say Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. That is our formula, the theory of everything that science is chasing after now, that is our formula, that Hashem Echad. So here's the formula: 1 becomes 2 in order to become 1. Now we see this in the creation of man and woman. We're told that in the beginning, and the Torah says that God created Adam, male and female, he created them. And by tradition, however we understand it, man and woman were one entity, and then woman was split off from man. And so here we see the exact same formula. Adam was created male and female, but then they were split into 2. And the very next verse in the Torah says, therefore a man leaves his father and mother and clings to his wife, and they become one flesh. So the commentators examine, what does it mean, one flesh? Some say it's through a marital union. They become literally one flesh. And others say that it means that they can create a child who is the one flesh made of the two parents. So here again, we see the formula of one becomes two in order to become one. So this is very significant that the divine creative energy that creates the world and maintains the world is the same mirror image in which man and woman are created. The importance that man and woman once were one is that there is a impression, a rishimu, psychologically, intellectually, emotionally, spiritually, that every male has a female component, and every female has a male component. And so I started with this is because we talk a lot about soulmates, people meant for each other, the shared, and we want to understand like the deeper creative process behind that is that male and female are attracted to each other because once we were one. Adam and Chava, male and female, were one entity. And so that in a sense is the glue, that's the attraction that draws men and women together, is from the original initial creative process that is left as an impression, spiritual, like I said, spiritually, psychologically, emotionally, within every single person. And so this has a lot to do with the nitty-gritty relations between men and women. Is we could trace it all back to this primordial union that we once were. Another idea, which is somewhat connected, is that in the Sfirot, so the highest of the Sfirot is Keter, the crown. I'm assuming that everyone is familiar with the 10 Sfirot, the 10 channels through which an infinite God creates and maintains a physical world. And the highest one is Keter. Keter is called the crown. And just like, let's say my kippah sits on the head is Chokhmah, Bina, and Dat, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. And just like the kippah sits on the intellect, the Keter is called the superconscious, with elements of the unconscious and subconscious. But it's more the superconscious, those levels of the soul that are ever present, but they're somewhat elusive. They're hovering over our conscious intellect. So we're told in Kabbalah and Hasidut that there are three aspects of Keter, called Emunah, faith, Ta'anug, pleasure, and Ratzon, will. So again, it's faith, pleasure, and will. And we'll see in a second the implications of these ideas. So we're told that, we'll start with pleasure, the middle one, that this pleasure, it manifests in the physical world, in the material world, but this is more of a spiritual pleasure. Like on Shabbat, we talk about oneg Shabbat, the pleasure of Shabbat. Now we have physical pleasures on Shabbat, but those physical pleasures are sourced in their spiritual root in the soul. Here we're talking about the idea of like bliss, spiritual bliss, the bliss of Shabbos. So on a psychological level, this level of pleasure is the component in a human being that takes pleasure with being alone. This is above Ratzon. The lower one is will, and this is the will that is engraved, embedded in the human psyche to seek companionship, to seek connection with the world, with the outside world. Pleasure is a very inner experience where one is alone with their soul, with God, with their thoughts. And everyone has both of these components. And this can lead to tremendous unity within a person, that a person recognizes the need to be alone, the pleasure that they get in being alone, but also can deal with the world and seeks out to have experiences in the world, especially companionship, to connect to other souls. Now, when these two energies are not integrated properly, so within the individual, there are problems, but certainly in a marriage relationship, it will lead to big problems. Because if one of them is, let's say, an extreme need of being alone and not sharing their emotions and not sharing experiences and not saying what's on their mind, and it's kind of living within their own inner world. So it obviously will make it very, very difficult to have a smooth relationship going. Other people are, they're called FOMO, fear of missing out on something. And they're constantly looking for outside stimuli, outside experiences, and many times at the expense of being able to concentrate on a marital relationship. They're just all over the place. So this is rooted very deeply in every person, where there is both of these energies. They do not have to be in conflict. And when they're meshed together, they bring an integrated kind of human being. We all have the need sometimes to be alone. We all have the need to have our own thoughts that we don't have to share with the whole world. And on the other hand, we all have a certain need to connect to other people and to be in loving relationships. So this is just another kind of spiritual, mystical underpinning of all relationships, but especially one as intense as a marriage relationship, as intimate. So we're going to take this idea now and bring up the idea called inter-inclusion. Inter-inclusion. And that means that within any particular entity, there are other realities integrated within it. In other words, things aren't so black and white. And since we mentioned the sfirot already, we will mention them again, is that each of the sfirot, and here I can't see the whole thing, but this is a chart of the sfirot. So we know that in Sfirat HaOmer, the 7 weeks between Pesach and Shavuos, when we're counting towards receiving the Torah in Sinai, so we count 49 days, And each of those days is a combination of the Sfirot. And so here, let's we look at Chesed, loving kindness. Well, a whole week is the week of loving kindness, the first week of Sfirot Omer. And the first day is Chesed Sheba Chesed. And the second day is Gevura Sheba Chesed. And Tiferet Sheba Chesed. And the Netzach, and Hod, Yesod, and Malchut. So all of a sudden, Chesed, which sometimes we see as being just like one energy, we see it's really a combination of many, many different energies. And so we have this idea of the book, the famous book, men are from Mars and women are from Venus. And we see that there are tendencies that we can identify. Of course, it doesn't apply to every man or every woman, but science and the social sciences are always making observations based on the predominance of how things work out in this world. Again, there's always a danger of stereotypes. So this idea of men are from Mars and women are from Venus. So if taken to the extreme, so we think men are so different than women, there's no way they're going to understand women. And women are so different than men, there's no way women can understand men. But if we go back to the first thing we said, one becomes two in order to become one. In other words, again, every male has a female component and is able to understand. And every female has a male component. And the inter-inclusion, this is a lot what has to do with a healthy marriage, because every partner in marriage has different needs, different expectations, different personalities, different desires, different interests. And if we look at all of those as black and white, then there's very little room for compromise, for blending a relationship. That's why we went back, this idea of, in Keter, of pleasure and will. It's really a 24/7 kind of exercise between a person who naturally is an individual. It has their own thoughts and their own world, trying to live a whole life with another person. And then when you have children, with children, and then you have extended families, you have neighborhoods, you have communities, you have all of Israel, you have the whole world. So each person is, in a sense, challenged how to make inter-inclusion, how to have everyone, in a sense, get what they need. So it says in the Gemara that when a Chatan and Kala get married, so they would ask the Chatan, Matzah or Motzeh? So what do they mean? There are two verses from Shlomo HaMelech. And in one verse he says, Matzah Isha, Matzah Tov. A man who finds a woman has found good, Matzah. But there's another verse from Shlomo Melech that says, Motzeh ani ha'isha mar memavet. I have found woman more bitter than death. So, like, why do we have these two verses? So in one verse it says Matzah Isha Matzah Tov. So that's the matzah, that's the chatan, matzah or motzeh. In other words, now that you're married, what did you find here? So Rav Ginsburg explains that in the second verse, it says there's a word ani between motzeh ani ha'isha. So he explains what this means is that In the first verse, matzah isha matzah tov, here's the chatan. Now this obviously works the other way also, from a kala to a chatan. But in the relationship, if one sees the other in the relationship as the main focus, then they find good. But if the person puts the word ani, me, ego, between what I have found and the partner, it means that what I was looking for was not so much love. I was looking for what will fulfill my needs. Now, obviously, we all have egos. We're all human beings, and we have needs, and we have what pleasure we want in life and what we expect from a spouse. But if that is the emphasis, then we're going to find it bitter than death, because we start the relationship completely wrong. Now, Reb Shlomo used to say, if you ask someone, why do you love this person? And the person says, well, I'll talk from the perspective of a man. She's beautiful. She's smart. She loves the outdoors, like I love the outdoors. She's a great cook. She's very friendly. So Reb Shlomo would say, it's a disaster. In other words, if you can make a list of why you love someone, and those are the reasons why you love them, he said, forget it. Forget it. Is that we love someone not because it's going to fulfill our checkoff boxes of what will make us happy, but it's because there's an attraction to this person that, in a sense, is super conscious. It's above normative logic. Now, obviously, we're not talking about love being illogical. That's not what we're saying. But we're just simply saying from this verse, Motzeh ani ha'isha mar memava. If I put the ani in the relationship in that way, then the whole idea of love is giving. Loving kindness is the ability to give. Now, obviously, a person is not going to choose someone who makes them unhappy and doesn't fulfill any thing that they might want in a partner. We're not talking about that, but we're just talking about that the love relationship has a spiritual, mystical aspect that we can't explain exactly why we love this person. We just do. We just do. Okay, so there is another very, very well-known teaching in the Gemara. In fact, anytime you go to a Shava Brachas, it's almost inevitable that someone's going to bring this up if they're giving brachas at a Shava Bracha. And that is that the Gemara points out that the word for man and woman, ish and isha, so they have two common letters, the aleph and the shin. The man has a yud and the woman has a hey. Without going into it Kabbalistically, but the yud is always identified with male, and the hey is, even in grammar, it's, you put a hey at the end of a verb, it becomes a feminine gender grammatically. So, but the Gemara points out that these two letters, yud and a hey, are actually a name of God. And so the famous saying is, if the two partners of a marriage have God in their life as the third partner, the yud and the hey, shechina b'neihem, im zacha Shekhinah b'neim. If they merit the Shekhinah, the divine presence will dwell with them. And if not, what is left is Eish, is fire. And they will burn themselves out because there's no spiritual element in their relationship. And this is, we're not talking about the religious world now, but we know in the non-religious world how many relationships are formed because of physical attraction. And when that physical attraction runs its course, then the relationship has all kinds of problems. So Rav Ginsburg has a very deep insight here. And again, we have to be very careful of not making stereotypes. We're just talking about general energies. And as we mentioned over and over again, is each male has a feminine aspect and every female has a male aspect. So he just asked, well, what is the Aish of a man and what is the Aish of a woman? So he says that the two letters, the Aleph and the Shin, for a man is Or Sichli, the light of intelligence. And what is the Aish of a woman? The Aleph and the Shin, Emunah Shlema, complete faith. So again, so I'm not misunderstood. We're not saying that men don't have faith and women don't have intellect. That is a very superficial way to look at what we're trying to share here, is that the male is, his Aish is more of an intellectual Aish, and the woman's is more of a faith. Now, if we remember, we said there are three heads of Keter. The highest one is faith. So if anyone would misunderstand and say, well, oh, you're putting the man on a pedestal and all the woman has is complete faith. No, actually that's the highest level. The Baal Shem Tov famously said that after all of the intellectual attainments that we can reach, he said, I choose emunah pshuta, simple faith. And that was the great love that the Baal Shem Tov had for what were called the simple Jews, the ones that 100% religious, but they didn't have time or didn't have they had for deep Talmudic learning. They davened, they said Tehillim, but they had incredible levels of faith. So the Baal Shem said, greater than all of the intellectual pursuits, I choose emunah pshuta. But it's not, emunah means simple faith, but it's not simple at all to come to complete faith. So here is just an insight. This is like a different way of saying men are from Mars and women are from Venus. It's not that Mars is good and Venus is bad, or Venus is good and Mars is bad. They're different. They're different, equal, but different. Okay, so what's very interesting is that if you take the word for woman, Isha, Aleph Shin He, it equals 306. 306 is made up of three letters. So there's a method where you take a word and you take the total numerical value of the word and you divide it by how many letters in the word to get what is the lowest, the common denominator. So if you take 306 and you divide it by its three letters, you get 102. In other words, 102 times 3 equals 306. So what is 102? Emunah, faith. So this is very, very deep understanding that the feminine in both a woman and a man is this idea of complete faith. And that complete faith can be the strongest element within a human being. In other words, people make the biggest decisions of their life: who to marry, what profession to go into, where to live, coming to Israel, whatever it is, based on our faith system. And then we will make these huge decisions based on faith, and then live it out. And so it's like one of the strongest components that we have is Emunah Shlema. Now, we said in this term, Zacha Shechina B'neihem, if the man and the woman merit and they have the Yud and the Hey in their relationship, the third component, the godly component of a relationship, then the Shekhinah dwells with them. So what I'm going to say now is it's a very, very important part of Jewish marriage, that we see that the relationship between the husband and the wife in a certain level is a reflection of the relationship between what's called Kudsha Brichu V'Shchinte, the Holy One, blessed be He, and the Shekhinah. The Holy One, blessed be He, is considered, in a sense, more of the surrounding light, the energy of God that surrounds the worlds, and the Shekhinah is the indwelling presence. The indwelling presence of God in this world is a feminine concept more than a masculine. Of course, it's both. God obviously is not male or female. It's both, but nonetheless, we have this concept of Kudsha Brichu V'Shchinte. This was a major part of the Zohar. One of the biggest innovations of the Zohar was its emphasis throughout the entire Zohar on the energies of masculine and feminine energies. And these are energies that in the Zohar are really one above talking about male bodies and female bodies. Obviously, it connects, but the Zohar is looking, remember the big bet of Bereshit, the dualistic world that we live in, the world of opposites. And the Zohar is pointing out that this energy, it calls the male and female energy. And from this, the Arizal came up with this intent that before we do many, many mitzvot, we say, L'shem yichud kudsha brichu v'shchinte, l'yached shem yud-hey v'vav-hey b'yichud l'shalim b'shem kol Yisrael, for the sake of the unification of the Holy One, blessed be He, and the Shekhinah, in order to unite the four letters of God's name, without going into the deep, but the four letters of God's name, the Yud and the Vav are considered the male energy, and the two Heys are the female. And so the Ari, taking from the Zohar, was in a sense showing the entire world is a manifestation of these two energies, male and female. And so therefore, in a marriage, the marriage becomes the main playing field, the main stage in which we can take the most spiritual of concepts and try to bring them into our practical lives. that the relationship between male and female, that's what they always mention, like in the formation of a child, that there is a third partner in the creation of the child. But the same thing as we learn from Ish and Isha, the Ish has the Yud of God's name, and the woman has the Hey of God's name. And so the relationship between male and female in a marriage is an attempt to replicate, to mirror higher energies that pervade the entire universe. And this is seen more than any places in the home, is that the idea of a home is to create what we could call a mishkan, is a dwelling place that we want a godly energy day. Now that's especially true, of course, on Shabbat, where many of the elements, our table, not that it's only Shabbat, but there's an emphasis in our tradition that the table that we set on Shabbat is like the altar. And the candles that we light are like the menorah. And the flowers, or in Sephardi tradition, saying a blessing on sweet smelling spices, is reminiscent of the ketoret, of the incense in the temple. And the two kruvim that sat on the ark, this is the husband and the wife. And so all of the elements of a mishkan we try to incorporate into our homes. So the home becomes, on the deepest level, just like the mishkan. When God commanded Israel to make a mishkan, the Torah says, "Asuli mikdash v'shechanti b'tocham." Make for me a mikdash, a holy place, and I will dwell in them. And so the well-known idea is, it doesn't say I will dwell in it, meaning in the Mishkan, I will dwell in them. So even greater than our homes becoming a Mishkan for God. Each person is a Mishkan. Each person becomes a dwelling place for God. Just like the body is the Mishkan, or the home, or the vessel for the soul. So on a higher level, it's supposed to also be a vessel, a home for divine energy. And so here, if, as the Zohar says, the whole world is made up of this male and female energy, excuse me, and as the Ari said, that the idea is to unite these energies, both physically and mentally and spiritually, psychologically, and on the practical level also. So then the marriage, the home, becomes the, like I said, the playing field, or the stage on which we try to become a vessel for these very, very high and deep concepts, but that we want to incorporate them in our home, in our hearts, and in our relationships. Now, before we gave a sort of definition of the difference between male and female, we said that the Eish, the fire of the man, represents Or Sichli. Or begins with an Aleph, Sichli with a Shin, and the woman is Emunah Shlema. There's another idea, comes from a saying that Eza Isha Kshera, who is a kosher woman, Ha'oseh Ratzon Ba'ala, the one who does the will of her husband. Now, that sounds very politically incorrect today, that a kosher woman is the one who does what her husband tells her. So there are many explanations that the way it sounds is not the way it is meant. First of all, it's pointed out that kishera can also be read ke Sarah, like Sarah, Sarah Imenu. And we know, here's this, the opposite. Here it says the kosher woman is the one who does her husband's doing, his will. But if you remember, the whole thing is when Sarah wanted to send Ishmael away, so that to make it clear that Yitzchak will be the one that will inherit, not really physically, but he'll be the next of the patriarchs. He will carry on the tradition. So Avram was upset, and God came to him and said, everything that your wife Sarah says, listen to what she's saying. So here's the exact opposite. So that is the inter-inclusion here. But on a deeper level, where it's explained in many, many places, that the word oseh, to do, also means to rectify. So the way that we read this in Chassidut is, who is the kosher woman? The one who makes, who rectifies, who directs her husband's will. So this is a very deep understanding. And again, many times it goes both ways. That's why inter-inclusion is so important. Whatever we're saying about a woman fixing a husband's will, we could say just as legitimately that a man is fixing his wife's will. Nonetheless, there's a predominance here. And that's why you have this, it's a secular phrase, but it's very true. Everyone's heard this a million times. Behind every great man is a great woman. And that's really what this is saying, but it said it in the Gemara 2,000 years ago. So, so that's one idea. So if we look at general relations without falling into the trap of stereotypes, but we see, and it's very true, that a lot of times men are can be all over the place in many different aspects of their lives. And that a marriage partner can direct, it rectifies a man's will. From what I see in the world, this is very, very true. Very true. So what about the other? So if this is what a woman, in a sense, is contributing to a man in a marriage, so what is the man contributing to the woman? And again, this doesn't apply in every single case, and it could be the opposite, that the woman is providing for a man. But nonetheless, this teaching is actually from Rav Ginsburg. And he says that a man gives a woman inner motivation and clarity. Because just like a man can be all over the place, a woman mentally could be all over the place also, in the practical world also. And that a man many times contributes to the relationship to motivate and to clarify, help a woman motivate and clarify. So again, these are just general ideas. I'm sure people have many different ideas about this. Okay, so we're going to go just a few more minutes, and then we're going to open it up for comments and questions. If for any reason there aren't any questions or comments, I will just continue to give over other ideas. So I just want to end that before we said, and we try to explain it in greater detail, this idea that the marriage relationship is a reflection of actually energies within God, the male and the female, kudshabrichu v'shchinte. And something that goes along with this is that also the marriage of a man and a woman also reflects the marriage between God and Israel. And we know that this is the inner meaning of the Song of Songs, Shir HaShirim. The entire song is an allegory. On the surface, it seems to be a story of a man and a woman, a very, very passionate love affair that's going on in the story. But we're told that this is also a passionate love affair, but it's between God and Israel. And we know that in many, many poems and many zmirot, we have this idea of the marriage relationship between God and Israel. We have it, we're told also the Kruvim, the two angelic figures that sat on the cover of the ark, that we're told that it's one is the male, one is the female, but it represents the love between God and Israel. But also it's the male and the female. So in our daily lives, a lot of times it's very, very hard to hold on to these more uplifting spiritual ideas. But truthfully, on a very, very practical level, if we remember them more, they actually give tremendous strength in the little details of this world of the greater importance of cooperation and love and sharing in a relationship, where all of a sudden the relationship is not between just two people. It becomes a much greater entity, a much greater idea. Now, we also see this so much in the laws of Yom Kippur, is that even though there are different religions or spiritual paths that encourage celibacy, that is the way to spirituality, is to really cut off from the physical in this world, and especially physical passion, sexual attraction. So, but we have the law, the holiest day of the year is the day of Yom Kippur, Shabbat, Shabbaton. And we're told that the Kohen Gadol cannot do his service in the temple, which was a service for all of Israel, if he was not married. And if it would happen that his wife passed away recently, if he wasn't remarried, he could not do the service. There had to be that unity of male and female in order to do the service on the holiest day of the year. So that holiest day of the year. So that tells us something very, very deep about how we look at the marriage covenant and sexuality as well. That in the regular world, what they've done with sexuality is just turned it into the most kind of physical animal urges. And in our tradition, it is really one of the highest spiritual acts. Here we see it with the idea of the Kohen Gadol. And there is an idea I heard from Rav Shlomo, I've heard from Rav Ginsburg, is we know that Moshe, at a certain point, separated physically from his wife. Doesn't mean that he divorced her, but as far as having intimate relations, and he had his reasons, he felt that was what God wanted from him, and he had to be in a state of ritual purity at all times. But there is an idea that Mashiach has to be married, or not has, will be married, is because that's a tikkun for Moshe. Like we say about Moshe, Hu HaGoel Rishon, Hu HaGoel Achron. He is the first redeemer, and he is the last redeemer. And so we all have tikkunim to make. So it's brought down that one of the tikkunim that even someone as great as Moshe is when he comes back in the guise of the Mashiach, that he will be married, because that will be a tikkun for him. So I think we're going to stop here, and let's see if there are any questions